I will call the session to order. My name's Jay Ireland, the chairman of the PAC-DBIA and CEO of GE's operations in Africa. I don't have a gavel, so that'll do. I would like to welcome you all to our second meeting with the secretary and the team. And we're very excited about talking today about the trip and some of the recommendations that we have. So we'll just get started, and I'll turn it over to Erin Walsh, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce.
Thank you, Jay, so much, and members of the council and Karen and Lindsay for joining us today. Each time the council meets is another the testament of the importance of the commercial relationship in Africa. Before turning the meeting over to Secretary Ross, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our new Undersecretary for International Trade Administration, Gilbert Kaplan. Today marks Gil's fourth week in office, but he's no stranger to ITA. He spent almost 5 years in ITA during the Reagan administration. Gil was the acting assistant secretary and deputy assistant secretary for the Import Administration, the predecessor to Commerce's Enforcement and Compliance Unit. Gil is a skilled trade negotiator. As a partner at King & Spalding, where he just came from, he focused on trade and trade cases and policy. We have been anxiously awaiting his arrival at the Department of Commerce and are thrilled to have him here today. Thank you, Gil.
Thank you, Erin, and welcome to all of you to this very important meeting. The President has laid out the top-line goals that drive his administration's work. One of these is promoting American prosperity. In that context, the International Trade Administration, ITA, has a key role to play in promoting free, fair, and reciprocal economic relationships. Specifically, ITA will pursue this goal through 1, strengthening the competitiveness of U.S. industry, 2, ensuring fair and reciprocal trade through the rigorous enforcement of our trade laws and trade agreements, 3, growing exports of both products and services, 4, attracting investment in U.S. communities, and finally, transforming American trade policy. I am pleased to be back at the ITA to lead this process of strengthening our national security by bolstering our economic security. I am also glad to have the opportunity to engage with the Council as it provides guidance to the President on how to expand the U.S. commercial presence in African markets. For me, this harkens back to my first endeavors in international affairs. Years ago, as a student, I had the opportunity to visit Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. At the time, I was a volunteer with Operation Crossroads Africa, a precursor to the Peace Corps. I recall driving north from Accra, Ghana, and then over into Cote d'Ivoire, where I spent 8 weeks working in the town of Adzope. I was quite impressed to have the opportunity to meet there twice the president of the Cote d'Ivoire, Felix Houphouët-Boigny, during my stay. Returning to the present day, I am extremely pleased to introduce Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, under whose sponsorship the Council is meeting today. The Secretary, on behalf of President Trump, has taken a keen interest in leveraging the work of the PAC-DBIA to deepen trade and investment relationships between the United States and African countries. You all know that the Secretary is one of the core members of the President's team. In this context, he is working tirelessly and vociferously to promote American industry and American exports. Secretary Ross has taken the lead on improving trade and commercial ties with Africa. Even tomorrow, he will be giving keynote remarks at the U.S.-Morocco Trade Forum, at the annual meeting of the Export-Import Bank, for which Africa is an important market, and at a meeting of the U.S.-Nigeria Council. I know the Secretary looks forward very much to leading the trip by Council members to Ethiopia, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana as a concrete manifestation of the Trump administration's commitment to close deals and to eliminate trade barriers to strengthen the U.S. African commercial relationship. Secretary Ross.
Thank you, Gil, and thank you, Aaron, as well. Thank you, Jay, as always, for your continued leadership of the President's Advisory Council on doing business in Africa. I'm sorry Laura can't be here today, but I'll send her in absentia my thanks to her for her dedicated work as Vice Chairman of the Council. Thank you also to the staff of the National Security Council for hosting the 5th meeting of the PAC-DBIA. Today we're at the White House under the auspices of the NSC. Their budget can afford it, mine cannot. We're saving up for the trip. This provides you with a clear indication of the importance the Trump administration places on the U.S. relationship with Africa. So I thank you to my U.S. government colleagues for your involvement in these deliberations. At our last meeting in November, I was interested in learning about the issues the Council identified as the top obstacles for U.S. companies in doing business with African customers. I also asked you to take a step further and develop recommendations of actions U.S. government can take to eliminate those obstacles. In parallel, as representatives of the American private sector, I asked you to determine 4 African countries that would be of greatest interest for a fact-finding trip as a means to provide insights into how we can promote U.S. trade throughout the continent. I agreed to lead the Council members on such a trip, given the importance of Africa to the future of global commerce. You've merged those 2 tasks and developed a set of recommendations tailored to the 4 countries you propose for the trip this summer: Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, and Ghana. Developing closer commercial ties between American companies and African customers is becoming increasingly important. And I hope that this trip will not only be a fact-finding trip, but a fact-making trip. We need some deliverables, we need some things to announce, and I think we'll get more into that as the meeting progresses. Meanwhile, we recognize that Africa is home to 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the entire world, and its population is projected to double by 2050 to 2.4 billion people. It's a fast-growing market with many young consumers, but it has been targeted by authoritarian countries intent on exploiting its natural resources and raw materials. We stand ready to help counter these threats and to help Africa achieve sustainable growth and development through strong trade relationships. But we have our work cut out for us. As you know, U.S. exports to sub-Saharan Africa have declined by 44% over the past 4 years, from $26 billion in 2014 to $14 billion in 2017. Driving this trend, China's exports to Africa have more than doubled since 2009, growing at an average of 14% annually since 2010. We must reverse these 2 trends. In addition, Chinese lending has ballooned, and that's no small portion of the reason for the swing in numbers. So I'm very happy to see Ray Washburn from AID come in. Where are you, Ray? Good. Ray's going to be going to Africa also this summer, and we're looking to him to help close the funding gap and the product gap. So thank you for coming, Ray. This morning, IMF noted that Chinese lending globally has surged from $1.7 trillion in 2001 to an incredible $25.5 trillion in 2016. And with the One Belt, One Road, I'm sure it'll be quite a bit bigger in 2017. That accounts for 3/4 of the increase in global debt over the period. So we realize that's a big hurdle to operate against, but we're going to do what we can. And much of their effort, as you know, is increasingly focused on Africa. I was just down in the conference in Lima, and they're also pushing Latin America pretty hard as well. So it's something that's a global contest that we have with them. But in response, we must develop and implement a real strategy to build U.S. commercial ties with the continent, to open markets to U.S.-made exports, and strengthen our cultural exchanges based on our common and deep historical bonds. We must work together to make it possible for all American companies to succeed in Africa and to spread knowledge about the opportunities that exist there. Your recommendations will be taken under very careful consideration by all of the agencies represented here today. All of us in government will work together to determine how to implement these ideas. The ideas are great, but implementation, as we all know, is the key. And that's the phase we really have to move into now. And it's imperative that we do so. I look forward to the discussion, but before I turn it over, I want to highlight a recent win for American businesses in Africa. Just over a week ago, the Yatra-led Albertine Graben Refinery Consortium signed a project framework agreement with the government of Uganda for the development, construction, and operation of a new oil refinery. This project is a joint venture with the Uganda National Oil Company and is financed in part by the Africa Development Bank, the International Finance Corp, OPIC, thank you, Ray, and your friends, and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. Valued at $2.85 billion, with $1.55 billion in expected U.S. content, this project will support more than 8,000 U.S. jobs and is the kind of scale of activity that we really have to see more of. The deal is a major win for U.S. commercial interests in Uganda. Our advocacy team did an outstanding job countering attempts by Chinese state-backed enterprises to influence the decision. God knows what techniques they were using in the process. I wrote 2 letters on behalf of the consortium to President Museveni and called the president a week before the signing of the PFA to highlight U.S. support for the project. We had a very good and very long conversation, and I promised him it was just the start of many such begging by me. These are the types of deals we hope to strike on our trip this summer. It represents what we can achieve when government acts as a facilitator, not just as a regulator. Now I turn it over to our host, Cyril Sartor, for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. I'd also like to thank your other colleagues here from Commerce Department. I'd like to thank Jay for his leadership and chairmanship, and I'd like to thank Secretary Ross for his vision, not just with the PAC DBIA, but for his other efforts to promote the importance of Africa within the administration. We do need to develop a real strategy for Africa, and we are working on one, and this meeting is very much an integral part of that overall strategy. While we may have enough money to pull together a shindig like this and invite all of you, We, in fact, do have very limited resources when it comes for developing an Africa agenda. So that means our ability to collaborate efficiently and to coordinate within the U.S. government, and to collaborate and coordinate between the U.S. government and all of you here in U.S. industry. That's going to be our critical comparative advantage in working to build a U.S. presence in Africa and to, in some ways, if not quite counter, but to compete vigorously with China, Russia, and even some Middle East players on the continent. So 2 pillars of the president's national security policy are promoting prosperity, as Mr. Kaplan has identified, and advancing U.S. influence. And I think the work that you all have been doing and what you will achieve later this year in your visit to Africa, again, are going to be fundamental in advancing those pillars and advancing our strategy for Africa. So I want to thank you all for your ongoing work, and I want to ensure you that the NSC Africa Directorate, our door is open to you. We welcome your phone calls in any way in which we can assist you, and we will be your partners as you move forward in this endeavor. Thank you. Jay.
Thank you very much, Cyril. And Secretary Ross, I want to thank you as being a member, our company being a member of that consortium in Uganda, that your help was instrumental in pushing it over the line, along with some negotiating tactics from the ambassador, as well as others. So it was very helpful, so thank you. So I'd like to move to the presentation of our findings from the last meeting. To that point, I think they form in 3 main categories. One is looking at procurement practices within the countries that we'll be visiting and what the government, U.S. government, can help us. 2 will be skills development and capacity building across those 4 countries, but across the rest of the African continent as well. And I think probably the most important is we look forward to really combating other countries, as the Secretary has mentioned, is really a holistic and encompassing U.S. approach to drive private sector and U.S. government maximum impact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We'll first talk about Ethiopia, and with that, our first recommendation to Fred Sisson. Fred.
Thank you, Jay. Mr. Secretary, as we looked across the different markets in Africa, we saw a huge opportunity in Ethiopia. We've got a country that, I'm sorry, is this better? In Ethiopia, we've got a country with 105 million people, 60% under the age of 30, a GDP of over $78 billion in 2017, and an average growth rate of over 10% over the last 12 years. So we've got a rapidly growing market with a large young population. The Ethiopian government has been struggling to keep its economy growing fast enough to put those people to work. It's been able to facilitate the rapid growth in infrastructure and other investments in the country, largely through borrowing. But at this point, the borrowing is over 60% of its GDP, and borrowing is now limited by the government's own balance sheet. The government is currently looking at other opportunities to continue the growth curve, and they're looking towards private sector. We now have a new prime minister in Ethiopia that's very open and willing to Western partnerships. In addition to that, and I think that this is probably one of the more important things, is we have decades of strong U.S. intervention in Ethiopia, help and goodwill that the U.S. people and the U.S. government has put into Ethiopia. And so that helps prioritize potential partnerships. And I think that poses a great opportunity for us. What the Council is recommending is we're recommending a government-to-government memorandum of understanding focusing on strategic industrial sectors. These sectors are currently sectors that are identified by the Ethiopian government, but they're also sectors that agencies, U.S. agencies and U.S. businesses have helped prioritize over the last couple decades, in particular over the last 5 years. And they've now managed to move into the policy of the Ethiopian government. The sectors that we're recommending are infrastructure, transportation, logistics, agricultural processing, power generation, pharmaceuticals, and financial services. This last one, financial services, is a relatively new one. Under the old prime minister, and old government, there was a resistance to opening up the financial services sector. The new prime minister is now indicating a willingness to open up the financial services sector so that they can help clear some of the Forex issues. One of the biggest challenges in Ethiopia is actually getting paid. You have money in birr, but you can't do anything with it outside of Ethiopia. And they realize that this is a constraint to infrastructure growth and just to their growth of their economy. And now they're opening it up. And I think the U.S. has some of the strongest financial institutions paired with some of the best technology providers. And I think we really have a good strategic position. In short, what we're recommending is that we're recommending that U.S. agencies participate and put together an MOU that can be executed during our June trip. We think that it's great timing within the market. We think that there'll be both bilateral support from both our folks on the ground there as well as the Ethiopian government. And we think that there's a backlog of U.S. projects that can take advantage of this very quickly and start proving it out as a positive policy move. On that, that wraps up our recommendation for MOU.
Great, thanks, Fred. I'd like to recognize some administration officials that will provide comments. Gil, I believe.
Thank you. And thank you, Fred. Those growth numbers and the opportunities you present are very persuasive in terms of what we want to do. The government of Ethiopia has defined a path for the country's development in its growth and transformation plan and is moving aggressively to reach its target. As you noted, key to this has been heavy public investment underpinned by foreign loans. But the government is keenly aware this is not sustainable. At the same time, U.S. companies are eager to increase their footprint in Ethiopia, sub-Saharan Africa's fastest growing economy. This MOU is the ideal mechanism to help the government of Ethiopia and U.S. companies meet their goals. By creating a more attractive business environment and ensuring that U.S. companies are aware of Ethiopian government priorities and the associated project opportunities, both parties benefit, with the additional long-term benefit of Ethiopia receiving American know-how, technology, and standards. It is the early access to Ethiopian ministry development goals and spending plans that is critical here. Getting this information in front of U.S. companies with technologies and services that can fill the project needs. With the recent appointment of Ethiopia's new Prime Minister Ahmed and the progressive economic reforms he proposes, this MOU could not come at a better time.
Thanks,
Thank
Gil. Ray?
Hi, I'm Ray Washburn. I'm the CEO of Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and OPIC currently has $22 billion in 90 countries around the world, 675 projects, 25% in Africa, but only $3 million in Ethiopia. An MOU would serve as a signal to the business community that the United States is serious and Ethiopia is open for business. The lack of infrastructure in the country is something that OPIC is postured to support: power, agriculture, and healthcare. If the Prime Minister opens a financial services sector, OPIC will be prepared to look at that market as well. We are actively seeking projects, new projects today, and if we get the MOU done, we'll be prepared to execute something soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Cheryl Anderson?
Cheryl Anderson from the Africa Bureau of USAID. Let me say at the outset that we're very pleased to be a key interagency player working closely with the Department of Commerce and the Advisory Council. We note that the PAC DBIA itself, as well as the recommendations here, fit very well with our administrator's vision of working with countries on their journey to self-reliance as well as enterprise-driven development. So on the MOU, I think we're supportive of the MOU. I think the highlighted sectors are appropriate, and we've shared it with our team on the ground. We've got a pretty substantial USAID team in Ethiopia, and I think they would really welcome further discussion about the focus of the MOU and possibly opening it up to other sectors where we have common objectives. And I would add that through the Power Africa Interagency Initiative, we did enter as U.S. government into an MOU with the government of Ethiopia in 2013, and this MOU had the intent that was similar to what we're talking about today. It presented a whole of government approach in partnering with the government of Ethiopia to develop its energy sector in a way that challenged the government of Ethiopia to make critical reforms to increase private sector participation. So maybe as a bonus on the trip, we thought maybe it would be an opportunity to revisit that MOU from 2013, and we might want to make sure that any additional MOUs with the government of Ethiopia take into account the existing MOUs that the U.S. government already has in place. And I guess I would just add, as an agency that has some experience with MOUs with African governments, we would caution that any MOU should include specific deliverables and very clear commitments that are achievable by both parties.
Excellent
Thank you.
points at the end. I agree 100, as the secretary just said, the same. Great. CD, are you?
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity. C.D. Glenn with the U.S. African Development Foundation. ADF is supportive of the establishment of the U.S.-Ethiopian government MOU focusing on strategic sectors. USADF currently provides grant financing and business management support to 10 Ethiopian small and medium-sized solar and wind energy firms. Our provision of grant financing, small grants to local early-stage enterprises linked to the development of private investment projects has the potential for significant U.S. imports, especially in the agriculture and energy sectors, which both USADF and the Ethiopian government have prioritized. Our focus on local enterprise development provides linkages to the local market and opens up marketing and distribution channels for U.S. energy-related businesses. The Foundation's core continent-wide competency is in the agriculture sector, and under a prospective government-to-government MOU, we would use the fact-finding trip to assess provision of our support to Ethiopia's grassroots agriculture production and processing sectors, as well as to expand and enhance our investments in the energy sector. Lastly, as a member of the Power Africa Interagency team, I'd like to acknowledge that the U.S. African Development Foundation is co-funding and investing in solar energy in Ethiopia alongside PAC DBI member GE, and we appreciate GE Africa, and we appreciate that collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, CD. Jesse Law from Exim.
Thank you. Exim Bank has a congressional mandate for sub-Saharan Africa, and when the Senate allows Exim to become fully functional by confirming our board nominees, we will be active in supporting the transactions across the continent. But not operating since 2015, Exim has established a pipeline of $14 billion in sub-Saharan Africa, which would in fact double our export capacity at the stroke of a pen. As our USG partners can confirm, there are many opportunities that have in fact been lost, but we do look forward to Exim functioning again. Exim supports the fact-finding trip to counter the challenge from China and other countries across the continent with a realistic and purposeful whole-of-government approach that includes MOUs, the USTDA Global Procurement Initiative, and the trade facilitation efforts. It's well known that the Made in the USA brand is recognized in Africa for quality and better value, And through these whole-of-government initiatives, we at XM want to make sure that U.S. companies can compete and secure the contracts on a level playing field. Our competitors are well ahead of us, though, with their exports, and leading the pack is China, which is Africa's largest single trading partner, having overtaken the United States since 2009. Yet it's not only China, we are fully aware of the competition from European and other Asian countries. These countries are playing with a game that we refuse to acknowledge as a superior game plan, at least in some ways, until now. And how do we know it's superior? They've been winning on the field. The Chinese companies and the other countries are using more sophisticated tactics, more blended financing, weaponizing trade finance as a national strategy to promote their domestic export products, and deploying more personnel from their respective financing agencies on the ground to get involved in whatever projects exist. These other countries are responding to this new dynamic and ever-changing competitive landscape by being fully engaged with government-to-government agreements in support of their exporters with financing and other commercial means. So we at XM are committed to the same in the support of U.S. jobs and realize Africa's potential. America's exporters and their supply chain need a coach to make our halftime game adjustment so we can lead and mount a comeback. The fact-finding tour for XM, and from our perspective, is that first official step in that direction. And I do hope that it will help us learn what our African friends would like to see the USG do to be more competitive. And with those around the room and the leadership that we have, I am convinced that we can adjust our game plan in the direction of success.
Thank you, Jesse. Is there any other comments from the council on this specific recommendation? Okay. I would also like to echo the support of getting a fully functioning XM. It's absolutely critical. Let's go to the second recommendation, which is around the USTDA Global Procurement Initiative, and Bill Killeen.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This is a topic that's near and dear to ACRO. Many of you may not know we supply steel bridges around the globe, and we're pretty much daily trying to demonstrate to people or teach people the importance of looking at life cycle cost and what they're getting in the numbers that they're being presented. And recently, very recently, there was a glaring example of this in one country where they're rebuilding for the fourth time the same design bridge, and the bridge has collapsed 4 times now in about a year and a half. So we've tried to explain to them that the bridge is not being built correctly and that there are issues, and they're still going to move forward with the fourth bridge of the same design. That being said, the recommendations that I've been asked to convey by the council here are that first, the USTDA has already developed with the energy or the electric power company procurement manual. So we're looking for the U.S. government to request of the board of the power company to formally adopt the manual. The second item is to update the manual utilizing the services of USTDA, World Bank, the DOC, to update it with more additional language on the life cycle cost. Then the DOC is to go out to U.S. companies to educate them on the Ethiopian manual and how they can work within the parameters of this procurement manual. Finally, there's an issue of translating the existing manual, which is in, if I pronounce it right, Amharic, and to translate that to the more universal language of English. And then the final recommendation is training Ethiopian procurement personnel on life cycle cost, and that is a challenging issue. So with that, Jay, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. Thomas Hardy from.
Thank you. Tom Hardy from the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. I couldn't agree more with the Council's recommendation to place a focus on improving procurement practices in Ethiopia as a means of doing more business in Africa. USTDA has actually supported Ethiopia's procurement reform since 2015, and those projects, that support is paying dividends. We've Recently, we hosted a delegation of aviation officials from throughout East Africa and introduced them to U.S. companies, U.S. technologies, goods, and services. But as part of that visit, we included a program focused on best value procurement, rather focused on quality, not lowest cost. And as a direct result of that training that USTDA provided to the Ethiopians, U.S. companies have secured over $20 million in contracts of U.S. exported goods and services. As was just mentioned by Bill, we've also worked with Ethiopia's Electric Power to develop a manual to help them make informed decisions based on quality infrastructure, not the lowest price. That currently is going through the final clearance processes by EEP, and we're hoping that that is approved before we arrive in Ethiopia. We look forward to the adoption of this manual, as it will provide a transparent, best value approach for procurement standards. They'll help Ethiopia make good investment decisions that are necessary to develop a fair and open and free market for U.S. goods and services.
Thanks, Tom. Secretary?
Thank you, Jay and Tom. As to the translation of the manual, I find it incredible that all these years have gone by and people interested in Ethiopian government, our government, haven't kicked in together and done it. How much could it possibly cost? I mean, are we talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars? I can't imagine it's a vast sum. But why don't we just get together, put a pot together and do it? I think it's ridiculous to have that kind of a structural impediment and just complain about it and not fix it. So let's start with, I'm going to pass the hat with letters to all of you as we get finished here. Let's put a kitty together. Let's get this thing done. Okay. But the topic of procurement is obviously an important one for U.S. companies. 3 out of the 10 council recommendations focus on procurement processes in Africa. And I think that's no accident. It's a big dollar item. It's an item that needs fixing. And so I think you're right to focus on it. A transparent, efficient, and well-functioning public procurement process is perhaps the best tool we have for eliminating corruption and assuring a level playing field for U.S. companies. Ethiopia has begun some procurement reforms, but a lot more needs to be done. Commerce's Commercial Law Development Program has a lot of expertise in this area, and USTDA is a key partner. Ethiopia is already a member of USTDA's Global Procurement Initiative, and these suggestions are a very good follow-on to those efforts. We reached out to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia last August to address our concerns, and before our trip, I will prepare a follow-up message to drive the point home to the new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed. You also recommend that the governor publicize Ethiopia's improved procurement practices to American companies. We're looking at options for a tangible event focused on this goal during our trip. This is part of what I meant in my introductory remarks when I said this should be not just fact-finding, but fact-creating, because that's what will help us communicate more broadly what's going on. We're working closely with African ministries to get actionable market intelligence at an early stage, even before tenders are announced. I think that's been one of our weaknesses historically, that by the time it gets announced, somebody else has had a big head start. Sometimes accidentally, a lot of times deliberately. We have to close the knowledge time gap. When we will work with interagency partners around the table today, we've got to ensure we're providing all the support we can so U.S. companies can close deals. So those are my responses to it. Let's get tangible, let's get precise, let's get functional.
Thank you, Secretary. I agree with you on those points, and from your point on the translation, I would say let's hire some Ethiopian law school interns. It'll keep the cost down.
Good.
And
I
and
take
have
that
them.
as a contribution from GE.
You want to say something, Mimi?
I just wanted to say that I speak and write Amharic, so
Oh,
I
there
can
you go.
contribute.
We can have her do it.
So I'll cut down your cost.
Okay, good.
Great. So we'd like to turn our recommendations over to the next country that we'll be visiting, which is going to be Kenya. And I'd like to turn it over to Andrew Patterson, a fellow resident of Nairobi with me.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Secretary. I'm pleased to be here today, and pleased to be talking about Kenya, which is currently our new home for Bechtel's corporate headquarters for Africa. We're celebrating a year of setting up our office there. And through that year, being on the ground really does make the difference. It's one of the things we've been talking about as part of attracting U.S. businesses is being on the ground, being engaged. We've had some good traction. We've had a lot of support from the U.S. government, from you, Secretary, from Commerce Department, OPIC, U.S. EXIM, and State Department on securing a contract to build a new expressway from Nairobi to Mombasa. We're working on closing that financing, and hopefully we'll be in a position during that trip to be able to have some type of ceremony to start that project.
What magnitude project is that?
So the project is around $3.8 billion. For 473 kilometers of an expressway. And we hope that this will clearly demonstrate the American quality, the local content engagement of delivering a true international standard of road there, which they desperately need if anyone's ever spent any time driving around Nairobi or driving down to the coast, which is a death. It can be a very dangerous situation. So I'd like to say thank you for all the support, and we hope we were able to make an announcement on that. Really, the framework of that deal was based around the Commerce MOU and with a direct procurement under a government-to-government framework, which we talked about in Ethiopia. We're going to talk about on other countries, and we'll talk about specifically about updating it here. And I think that's a real testament to engaging under an MOU and the work that can come out of that. And we would encourage not only in Africa, but other parts of the world for commerce and the U.S. government to engage in these areas. Some specific recommendations to get in for the trip. We talked about this a little bit last time around local content requirements and how they can be a real obstacle. Obviously, governments are very focused on building their capacity with their supply chains and their skill sets. And this is one of the areas I think the Chinese have not done a good job at, and this is what gives an opportunity for American businesses to do well. But there are challenges when governments sometimes overreach on local content programs, including in Kenya. There can be cases where you need to bring in skilled labor and even what would be deemed unskilled labor, but people have experience in the construction industries to be able to set up the job, get the job going, manufacturing facilities, and technology areas, and it's quite important. And there's a lot of restrictive requirements in Kenya around this areas. Although we're able to bring in top managers like Jay, I'm sure has no problem getting his visa in Kenya. When you're looking at larger teams to deliver these projects, it becomes a bit more complicated. And this is an area of focus that we would like to talk about. Additionally, they've issued a new procurement act in 2016, which really puts a bias on Kenyan companies securing work and restricting the ability, in some cases, smaller American companies of securing technologies or supplying materials and skill sets in Kenya. There's also particular areas of carve-outs that restrict the U.S. companies to be able to compete fairly on this and gives the price advantages to Kenyan market. Of course, we understand the desire to build the Kenyan base, but being able to get American companies at all levels, small and big, into these countries, such as Kenya, and working with local companies is really going to be able to build the local capacity and skill transfers. That's an area that we'd like to focus in on. Some of the market barriers are specifically around these local contents, the procurement acts. The government of Kenya and the president has set out new objectives, the Big Four. And these Big Four actually, I'd say, complement for what U.S. businesses want to do in Kenya within the industries and manufacturing. But some of the specific Big Fours is they want to increase 15% of the GDP to come from manufacturing, build over 500,000 affordable new houses, 100% food and nutrition security, and 100% universal health care. This is an area that I think that we as U.S. companies can come and help support these big fours. Obviously, the backbone of the big four is infrastructure and energy, and having a reliable network, and hopefully the expressway will start soon, and delivering that will create the opportunity to expand on these big fours. Energy sector and stability of energy is very important in bringing down those price points. So our recommendation is, given the increase of local content policies and the market access barriers, we'd like to see USTDR to engage with the Kenyan government and see if we can come up with flexible local content programs specifically to support U.S. companies coming into the market and being able to allow us to bring in the right skill sets to be able to deliver these. The second recommendation is around the MOU. It was a successful MOU in 2015 with the new Big Four objectives, with increased presence from U.S. companies. We think renewing this MOU and signing an updated one would be strategically important around this, highlighting the benefits of bringing in OPEC, U.S. Exxon, similar to the Ethiopia, have specific targets of what can be included. There are things that we can include in local content, including, in the MOU, such as local content policies, being flexible, and maybe some areas around the restrictions on procurement, to allow smaller U.S. companies and technologies to be able to come in and compete. The third area is really the AGOA is very much Kenya one way, and we'd like to see that coming both ways, and the opportunity for U.S. companies to compete more. The delivering of infrastructure and energy is critical to that. So getting these types of projects, such as a highway, some power projects, we've also been discussing gas to power solutions there. These are the type of things that can create an environment to allow more U.S. companies to come set up operations there. And then the fourth area is to engage with U.S. agencies, U.S. government agencies such as OPEC, U.S. Exxon, USTDA, MCC, USAF, to collaborate and work together to find solutions for U.S. companies to deliver these infrastructures and addressing the local content and procurement issues.